It was cold when he arose at 4:15 in the morning to go outside to pray. Groggily, he slipped out of bed, gathered a basin of water to wash himself in the ways he had been taught. Thus begins a story recounted by a character in Salman Rushdie's book, Midnight's Children. The man dressed and he put on his father's cap, after which he carried the prayer mat out the door, laid it in front of their old dark house and rolled it onto the ground. The ground felt deceptively soft under his feet, and it made him simultaneously uncertain and unwary. He was home now, and he planned to settle back into the ways of his life that he knew before he had left to study in Germany. However, when he walked outside, he now saw the familiar Kashmiri hills through traveled eyes. The 5 years away had changed him. Yet there he was attempting to reunite himself with an earlier self that could ignore this German influence. He prayed, "In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful." The exordium spoken with his hands joined before him like a book, comforted a part of him, but it made another part of him uneasy. Praise be to Allah, Lord of creation. But the voices of his former classmates crawled into his head, invading him. Here was Ingrid, briefly Ingrid, this woman who had been his lover, her face scorning him for this Mecca-turning prayer. Here, his friends Oscar and Elise, the anarchists, mocking his prayer with their anti-ideologies. He continued, "The compassionate, the merciful, King of the last judgment." But it didn't work. "Guide us to the straight path." But it was no good. He was caught in this strange middle ground, trapped between what he had known and what he had come to know, trapped between belief and disbelief. The grandfather bent his forehead towards the earth. Hinging at the waist, he leaned over toward the earth, the ground covered with the prayer mat, curved up towards him and smote him upon the point of his nose. 3 drops of blood plopped out of his left nostril, hardening instantly in the brittle air, and lay before his eyes on the prayer mat, transformed into rubies. Lurching back, he felt his nose, and he put his head once upright and said, seeing the tears that had fallen from his eyes springing like diamonds on the ground. He brushed them away, rolled up the prayer mat, stared out at the lake, and resolved, "I will never again kiss the ground for any god or any man." In that moment, he was knocked forever into that middle place, unable to worship a God in whose existence he could not wholly disbelieve. Did you catch that? He was thrust into a middle place where he was no longer able to worship a God and who he could not wholly disbelieve. That was shocking to me. That is not what I expected to happen next in the story. I thought, well, surely this man just had this negative experience, and so he will brush off and cast away what he knew as his religious upbringing. But that's not what happened. While the path of his familiar practices was no longer meaningful to him, it wasn't connecting him, he still couldn't deny this connection. I totally relate. I was raised Catholic, and I too often had conversations in my head during church critiquing what I was hearing. And more often than not, church was not able to wrestle away the voices that I was listening to. And when I was a freshman in college, those voices finally won, and I left church. However, I wasn't entirely able to disbelieve either. Just because I didn't think that people got it right in the conservative Catholic churches that I grew up in didn't mean that I could invalidate this felt experience that I'm connected to something I cannot escape or comprehend or find a way to name. I had known it all of my life, like the 5-year-old child out in the field sensing the light and the warmth and the love. It lived in the core of my being, past all logic, past language, and cognitive thinking. It was something that as a child I had grown to appreciate mostly in Mass. Those seeds of wonder were given to me in praying and singing, in taking communion. But over time, the seeds sprouted, and they grew beyond the confines of my Catholic upbringing, but I didn't know what to do with them. I knew they wouldn't fit in a church, right? I mean, after all, I had been raised in one. So I knew what religion was all about. Thank you very much. I've learned all I need to learn about religion. I'm done with that. I knew what it meant to be Christian, and I knew what people meant by the word God and prayer. If you use that label, well, surely I knew what you meant. And I concluded that religion didn't really speak meaningfully to modern life, or to mine in particular. The dimensions of religious life were in a box with cold words. And it fit neatly there. And it was a shape that I could spot like a mile away. Because they're all the same, religious people, right? That's what I thought. I thought religion wasn't about engaging truth for yourself. No, it's about fitting into the prescribed box that someone else ordained and handed to you. What a foolish endeavor. You won't catch me doing that. I was so happy to be rid of religion that I spent my time on the weekends going hiking on trails, spending my time communing with reality. And in Vermont, out in the Green Mountains, or on the meditation cushion at the Zen Center, or the Shambhala Center in town, or the Vipassana Retreat Center in the Northeast Kingdom. Or, it was a good thing I didn't care anymore about religion, because so I could do the things that I wanted to do, like on the weekends, go to workshops on shamanism, and focus on reading Sufi poetry, and plan a 9-day solo wilderness trip, where I intentionally brought no books to read, so that I wouldn't be distracted from my goal, where I actually fasted for 3 days and went and set up camp in a spot where no one would encounter me, so that I wouldn't be busy with the setting up and the taking down of camp and the cooking of the food and the cleaning it up and hanging of the bags so the bears don't get it and all that. No, I'm not going to be busy reading and doing all these things. I'm instead just going to be here in the wilderness in the ways the transcendentalists describe, right? I couldn't scrape that religious impulse out of me. I craved it. I wanted to live a good life, a life that was about something more than just me. I wanted to feel intimately connected to whatever truth and mystery was in this wonderful place. But I totally didn't admit this to myself. I was not religious. And I couldn't be, because I judged religion as hokey. I judged it as something that smart people didn't do, and that God, I didn't even say that word, God was not something an intelligent person would relate to. And yet my actions were all about this mystical experience, this sense of just wanting to commune with the world, and truth that lied beyond my small thinking. So like the man in the story, I was living in this middle place. He couldn't pray as he had been taught, and he couldn't wholly disbelieve in God. In the book, we learned that the man's decision to never kiss the ground again for any man or God made a hole in him, a vacancy in a vital inner chamber. That hole appears when we try to cut out part of our experience in order to fit into some box we think we should be. I know because I did this to myself for a long time. I could not accept my religious impulse. It was like I had multiple religious personalities who didn't see each other. And that's a baffling place. And I couldn't integrate them. Living exiled from oneself is not a way to live. Maybe you've experienced this too. It's a painful place to be, right? Maybe your path has been different, though, than mine. Maybe you weren't raised with religion. Maybe the first church you've ever been to is this one. Maybe you've never had to lay down a set of religious beliefs that you didn't believe in. Maybe you never grew up finding a concept of God necessary or really descriptive of your experience of the world. And then one day, you stumbled across something that challenged that non-belief, that no need for belief. Perhaps it was the knowledge about our universe, actually, that smart people have come across, that if the rate of expansion of our universe 1 second after the Big Bang had been smaller by even 1 part in 100,000 million, this universe would have collapsed before it even reached its present size. And similarly, if the rate had just been a little bit smaller, or higher, the universe would have expanded too rapidly for planets or stars to condense out of the dust. You learned that it's more likely, actually, for an earthworm to win a horse race than it is for the conditions to appear for our universe to exist. And maybe this improbability questioned your non-belief. This improbability no longer allowed you to easily shrug off the notion of some kind of intelligence. You found yourself maybe in the middle ground, unable to disregard a God in which you could not wholly disbelieve nor embrace. Or maybe you've never been able to believe in a source of divine love because of all the places in the world where you've seen its utter absence. How could a universal love allow this kind of suffering and tragedy? And then, over time, you experience the power of resiliency in yourself, in others. You watched forgiveness show up in the most unlikely relationships. You experienced the healing that restores life after devastation. And when you thought what could never happen, happened, and the hardened heart softened, even though you didn't mean it to, or even though that person kept rehearsing the story of their begrudging violation, and yet it happened, that hardened heart softened, and it extended love even to what originally hurt it. You sensed holiness. And the transition between non-belief to belief was probably easy for you. Unlike me, it's probably just me, right? Who has a hard time with religious baggage, with having a sense of wanting to know and not know and living with both of those at the same time, with those judgments. I'm sure you've never had internal resistance to your own theological questions. No discomfort, no sadness, no confusion. I know that's not true, right? The undoing of the foundation of our beliefs is incredibly unsettling. And if you've ever been in a newcomer class and listened to people talk about why they're here, we hear stories over and over of the upheaval that it causes in our families when we change traditions, within our marriages. We see people's tears and their grief. It's hard to let go of a familiar spiritual home and to take the risk of seeing if another one might resonate more authentically. Finding a new religious community isn't easy, but it's also not easy cutting out a part of the truth of our life experience in order to fit in to some place. I want Unitarian Universalist churches to be a place where we no longer have to cut out truth and experience. I don't want any of us to have to do that, which also means I don't want to have to do that. I want our churches to be a place where we feel comfortable to share, and if not comfortable, at least called, actually required by this faith to actually be authentic and whole, to share our non-belief, but also our belief. As a new minister here, I have to come out of the closet that I have belief and non-belief. And I don't want to cut any of that out as I engage in ministry with you. So in a month where we think about this theme of renewal, I want to be clear about my authentic source of renewal. It comes from a God in which I wholly do not believe. Growth on my spiritual path includes prayer. Like, I pray a lot. And you wouldn't know that from looking at me, but sometimes when I'm in a Soul Matters group or in a social justice event and I'm quiet, I'm not a quiet person. You may have discovered. I'm often quiet because I'm praying. I'm acting as if there is a God, that there is some source of love and wisdom that is bigger than me, which sometimes it wouldn't have to be too big for it to be bigger than me, even as I doubt that any deeper meaning lives in this existence beyond what we give to it. And I've struggled with holding space for both of those. I thought, well, you're a minister. Robe up, woman. You know, I had to wear my stole today. I was like, I just have to. I put the robe aside, but I was like, I need to robe up. You need to have a clear, systematic theology where you can just say, well, this and this and this and this and this. And thank God I had an experience in chaplaincy in the hospital where all of my answers were undone by the reality of life and suffering I confronted in front of me. And I thought, what a gift for everyone who will encounter me, that I no longer think I know. But I'll tell you what, I pray a lot, and I act as if there is, because it saves me. It saves me from my fear, from my overreactions, from my shame, from my pride, from saying hurtful things or acting in cowardice. Do you know what I do on Sunday mornings on my way here? I pray. How can you get up in front of all of these people you do not really know and share your spiritual truth? I pray. I ask for some larger wisdom to come through me that I may be of service, to let that critic be left in the back seat so that I can be present and real with you. Prayer is the one thing that helps me when all my buttons are pushed. Do you know that place in your family, your friendships, in your parenting, in your workplace, wherever we go, we might find those familiar places pushed and reactive. And hurtful, devastating words are like one breath away, right? Prayer is the only shield I have between me and that moment where I'll have to make amends for something I've done. I pause. I ask for help. I ask for anything to come out of me that is different than my usual reactive response. And while I don't generally think of it in terms of renewal, this month while we're contemplating this message, I think this is really asking for renewal. It's a pause to ask for renewed vision. Help me to see this person in the light of love. Renewed actions. Help me to participate here with a larger love. To renew my spirit, help me to even have the energy to pray, to ask for help. And that is what I call prayer. Because I lose my way. And I get stuck and I suffer. And then I ask this larger source of love to speak, to see, to hear, to do what love wants me to do, rather than what my self-centeredness is really convincingly urging me I need to do. And wouldn't you know, it works sometimes. More often, acceptance will infiltrate me, and I can hear what I usually cannot make room to hear. I hope that you've experienced this. And whatever you call it, I hope we all know that it's miraculous and full of grace. Because when we can pause and not say the same old thing, but instead we actually hear something funny or playful come out of our mouths instead of being so deadly serious. And when forgiveness begins to open the heart, I'm pretty sure I put on lockdown when I walked in the room. That turning towards love, that unexpected change in our beings is holy. It's healing. The chink in our armor, it opens and allows for the possibility of turning towards love. Some people call that sacred. Some people call that God. Some people. These moments are powerful. When the circumstances are tailored, particularly for us, to the dimensions of our lives, in ways that can release our hearts that are unexplainable, that help us to blossom once again into a posture of trust. When that happens to me, I am wholeheartedly thrust into that middle ground where my disbelief cannot, and I have no part of me that wants to cut that out and say, this is just random. That has no meaning. I can't. The relationships in my life that have been restored from my opening, the relationships I never thought I could have, that have been restored and be blessing me now because I opened to that. I call that the God in which I cannot wholly believe. Who knows where it comes from? Maybe it comes from therapy. I don't know. I believe in that too. But I don't know how to talk about being a people of renewal without naming that experience, without naming and explaining to you that sometimes you're going to hear me say God, and that's what I mean, I think. Sometimes. That source of love, that lure that's persuasive, not coercive, not all-powerful, not in control of everything that happens in the world, and yet somehow infiltrating and cracking open and creating new possibilities. I want you to understand that that's how I work religiously as a minister, and I want to feel free to sustain myself in that here. In our work, I don't know how to do social justice without that. How do you possibly, seeing all of the issues and pain of the world, stay renewed? Well, I have to have that. And I want you to feel welcome to join in that with me when I invite us into prayer or meditation. Those words may not be your words, but my guess is they are for some of us here. And I want to open the possibility for meaningful exchange in that realm, that we can all share what sustains us, what renews us, so that we can go deep and stay on the path. I know that what I'm saying will resonate with some of you and not with others. I've given a version of this sermon in 5 congregations now, and each time afterwards, people share often an outpouring of their own experience afterwards, speaking to their own agnosticism, and the challenge of accepting that they both believe and disbelieve. I feel super comfortable leading a worship service where I never say God, and I never pray, and I never allude to my real theology or my belief. I feel very comfortable sharing my non-belief, but my belief like hides out behind my non-belief and says, I hope they don't see me. I hope they don't judge me and think less of me. And I think, man, you got to preach about that, woman, because what is our church if we have to hide who we are and cut out those experiences in order to be accepted? And I told you I've offered a version of this prayer in 5 churches, so you know this isn't about you, this is about me. But this is about the theological baggage. I thought about actually bringing up a suitcase with me today to just really own and say, this is like my own theological baggage, this is my own inner judgments. But from the times I've shared this with other people, I know I'm not alone. We feel safe and smart sharing non-belief. Others among us, like me, probably feel a little scared and judgmental of saying, oh no, are they going to will I lose credibility? Will I lose respect if I actually say, I believe, ... and really question that. It's hard to live trapped in between, feeling at odds with ourselves and our experience. Thinking back to the man in the story, though, we see that even the imagery the author used foreshadowed this new possibility that was just waiting for the man to accept. That when he hit his nose on the ground, what came forward? Rubies. And when he sat up and a tear came out, it was a diamond, these precious gems. That no matter the fact that his practice was no longer entirely meaningful to him, it still brought forth this place of wonder in him. He thought that path should lead him to clarity. You know, why am I doing this prayer if I still hear these other voices coming in? Clearly there's nothing there. This path is worthless. I'll just throw it away. That's not what actually happened to him. He tried to throw that away, but he found this inner hole. That just because a path doesn't lead us to clarity of belief or non-belief doesn't mean that path has failed us. Perhaps that's not a failure, but maybe that is the purpose of that path. He was still open. That's a gift of religion. Man, I love certainty. I love being able to close the door on something. Whew, I figured one thing out. Whew, what a relief. But that's not what the religious endeavor invites us into. Remaining open, remaining curious, remaining in a state of wonder. It's a gift that we're invited into if we accept it. Keeping us available to engage the world around us and be truly alive for this creative interchange. Religion at its best holds space for that middle ground that we can fully occupy. So perhaps that's the error of our ways when we think about religion, or I should own it, of my ways, when I thought that religion was about this little box that gets handed and that people then climb inside and they live there. Maybe religion is not about confines and answers, a resting place with quantifiable factual statements. Because when I think of religion that way, then I want to disregard what I was given as a child. But when I appreciate it for the wonder, actually, that I was handed seeds that grew beyond that box, uncontrollable, well, then I can appreciate that and see that my upbringing served me well. And I think many people who come to our church are like me in this regard. We're hoping there's some truth here we can live with when we enter. But we didn't necessarily realize that the truth we were hoping for is one that calls us to be oriented to the mystery of life, rather than correctly naming it. And I didn't know that when I came to Unitarian Universalism, but that's what I wanted. How to stay open, how to be with the mystery again without slipping into the certainty of a box that there's a God or no God or we're stupid or we're immature or any of that, to just instead allow myself to enjoy wonder and awe. At our best, Unitarian Universalism recognizes the truth in Rumi's poem, that to define me and narrow me is to starve yourself of yourself. When we nail down the truth in a box of cold words, that box becomes our coffin. Many people are seeking a faith where this new orientation to truth as a way of being with the mystery rather than naming it. Let's be a house for their renewal, for our renewal, offering one another space to explore whatever it is that opens us up. Source of wisdom and love that gives ground to our being and this moment. May you ever guide us in our opening. Amen.